All right, guys, very excited to welcome into the program someone who I've been listening to, reading, following for over a decade now. One Mr. Ted Knutson from StatsBomb, but more importantly, from the Transfer Flow newsletter. I would imagine I was one of the first 500 subscribers to this newsletter. That is a badge that I am going to wear very proudly. Ted, I have wanted to get you on the show for a while, and you are definitely are more influential in my life than many other guests on this program. As I think StatsBomb was the first resource I found when I decided to get into English soccer. So thank you very much for joining the program today.
I'm glad we could have that foundational step there. I founded it because there wasn't anything else way back when, so that's why I needed to make it exist.
No, there was nothing. So to take viewers into this parasocial relationship, basically, when DraftKings added soccer as a fantasy product that you could play, there was not really anywhere to get information. I mean, even set pieces, expect who's taking shots, nothing like that. Really, nothing you could find. Even lineup things. Like, as someone from an outsider but wanting to play this new game, something as simple as what position does Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain play, or where does he normally occupy the pitch? And StatsBomb, which was Ted's kind of first foray into content and providing stats, was like really the only place that you could find it. It was an invaluable resource.
Yeah, we had a partnership with FBref for a while. They're Opta now, and it's still like the free resource that everybody uses. I do remember when we sort of like discontinued the partnership from FBref because they wanted to have many more leagues, and we were like, "Ooh, I think that's going to eat some of our data because it'll be available for free." Anyway, there were a bunch of gamblers that were very, very sad because they'd been getting the best expected goals numbers in the game for free on this website. And we were like, "See, exactly."
It's very, yeah. I remember it well. I remember that transition very well. So I actually don't know the answer to this question. I've always been curious. Why soccer? I think particularly for this audience, a much more American audience, soccer is, I mean, obviously interesting, but a hard gambling sport. It is an events-based sport. The sample sizes are sort of interesting in the sense of you have to come up with identifications for skill levels of players. Teams are always kind of chopping and changing. Why in the gambling world did you gravitate towards soccer, not baseball, not American football, not any of these other sports?
This is a really old story that I'm not sure I tell very often. So that helmet in the background there. Yeah, so I went to that university as well,
No
and
way.
yeah,
Wow, small world.
so 1998 World Cup. I was in between my undergrad and going to grad school in Atlanta, and I was working nights. I think at UPS at the time, exhausting stuff. And then I'd wake up and we'd have all the World Cup on. And then I was like, you know what? I really want to learn how to play soccer better. And so the only place that I could find to play was like this pickup game with all the international students attending OU. And oh my God, summertime, this was just brutal stuff where like you'd go out and the pickup game would start at 7 and finish at 9 or something like that. And still 90 plus degrees when you're
Oh yeah.
driving home. Like you see the temperature on the bank. So um that plus International Superstars Soccer, which was a Nintendo 64 game at the time, like really kind of kicked off this deep interest of something that I kind of was interested in as a kid, but then started following really closely. I was like, this is a great sport. I love this sport. The only other sport that I love possibly more than this, and this might just be because of a distancing, is I love Aussie rules football, just an absurd
Oh,
amount. But it comes on at the wrong time. I'm never able to pay attention to it. And so I've had a couple of deep dives into Aussie rules when I've gone to Australia. It's an insane game. It's like a platypus of a sport. And if you take it from that perspective, you're like, this is incredible. I love this. But yeah, so soccer 1998. Became an Arsenal fan because they were good and they were
yeah.
on the highlight show regularly. They had some World Cup winners as well because that was my area that I went into. And then my gambling teeth were cut on college football, which I was really good at. And then, yeah, just following soccer pretty passionately. I wasn't very good in the early days of my soccer stuff because I didn't know how to do an Asian handicap. And then the 1x2, which is like, one team, other team, or draw. Like that's a
Right.
confusing way to try and figure out probabilities initially. But yeah, I just sort of ended up being thrown into the deep end there in my gambling career and had to figure it out and ended up being like, oh, Okay, I understand this pretty well now. So
The Asian handicap and the three-way money line market. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience in your life where your casual soccer friends, they come in for the European Championship or the World Cup. They're like, what side do you like? Do you like France or Spain? And then it gets to the end of 90 minutes and it's 1-1 and it goes to extra time and they think their ticket is still alive. They're like, oh, we have the France money line. All right, we're just rooting for France to win in an extra time here. I mean, I as someone who really follows soccer, but most of my audience is very into American football, have had that conversation many times, which of course ends with the inevitable, well, that's stupid. Obviously that's stupid. That's not the way it should work.
the more insane thing actually is thinking that a second half actually includes the overtime. Which is the way
Right.
that the U.S. gambling works, but it shouldn't work that way because, like, the second half was this period of time. It's not this period plus additional things beyond that.
Yeah, it's a very complicated market. I actually this is kind of neither here nor there, but do you do or have you ever done any of the player prop stuff for soccer? Corner markets, fouls, passes, anything like that. I'm assuming kind of in your heyday of being involved, and even at Pinnacle, that stuff was not nearly as big as it is now.
Yeah, so Pinnacle was a different animal. For those of you who don't know what Pinnacle is, like it's been around for 25 years, started in 1998. And it was originally a place that you could call in to do your bets, like because the internet wasn't a big thing in 1998.
Right.
So you'd be able to call this offshore bookie, and the reason why people cared about it is because it had really cheap lines. And when I say cheap lines, like you were able to bet minus 105, minus 105, as opposed to minus 110 in Vegas or wherever else it was. And so it also moved lines in pennies. So like, you could have a minus 101 or a plus 102. And in those days, it was like, what is this craziness? For those of you who are in Europe following along, I'm very sorry that I'm not using decimal odds, but I figure I'm talking to my right audience here.
I've been doing this for a long time. I still cannot make heads or tails of the decimal odds. When I load up Pinnacle just to check a line, I have to switch it to American odds every time. I can't do the translation manually.
Yeah, try that with fractional odds, which is what was popular in the UK. And I was like, there's no way we're offering this on the website. So I started with Pinnacle in 2007, and the focus of Pinnacle is really on volume. And so they will take lots of action on sides and totals and money lines, first halves, sort of some derivatives off of that. It's like a team total and stuff like that. But the focus was not on player props because that's actually quite a small amount of the total betting.
Oh yeah.
And Pinnacle's focus for customers is we want big high volume bets. We don't need small people that are betting 10 pounds, 15 pounds, or $10, $15 on somebody to score, right? But we started to grow a little more in that direction, and they wanted things like, who is going to score or will score in this game or stuff like that, especially for big things like the World Cup or Euros or stuff. And so in the last 4 years that I was there for 8 years. The last 4 years, we started to add more things like that. And these days, I think that you can get quite a lot of modeled props off of, good data, but then also the lines that are, the main lines that you have, because those two things, player props and being successful and being correlated to your team winning, is probably pretty strongly tied together, right? From a statistical perspective. So they
Right.
do some, but the difference is just that it's still pretty small for them, and it's also a place that really sharp people can beat up the books, and they do. And because it's a difficult modeling question, there are so many things you don't know and understand about it from a generalized model that people are able to use their own intuition to be able to beat that.
That's very true. And this is my understanding. Now, I am not a modeler. I'm not a mathematician. I've got a good ability to use models that other people make. I can use those, for fantasy sports, for wagering or whatever. But my assumption has always been that of kind of the major sports that have worldwide attention and get billions of dollars wagered, like baseball's got to be the easiest to model because everything is kind of isolated. Football more difficult. Sports like hockey more difficult. But my assumption from a very high level would be, particularly before player tracking data was available for any kind of public consumption or use, modeling European soccer, European football had to have been like just an insanely tall task, like to begin with.
It still probably is. There isn't player
Right.
tracking that's widely available to people that do the modeling, like maybe at the
Okay.
syndicate level, but not at the normal
Sure.
human level. I think high event sports are easier. Like, so basketball's a little easier to model. There's higher frequency
Yeah, very
of
iterative.
yeah, and 82 games, right? So like when you're dealing with, 162 games or 82 games, you're there. And then you get down to the 16 or what is it, 17? Is it 18? How many games do we have in the NFL now?
So it's 18 weeks, 17 games now,
There we go.
plus the preseason, which is kind
Right.
of a joke.
And then college has its own thing where, you have the longer playoffs. In that small sample era, it's difficult, and I think that that's the most challenging model. Also, places that have like really extreme pressure points. So, like fourth quarter in the NFL has a lot of pressure points, and their inflection moments that will dramatically swing the odds one way or another. NBA has that to a lesser extent. So those are like the really difficult modeling elements. For soccer, I think the most difficult thing that we found was that there was an insane amount of inertia in a tied game. Like
Hmm,
yeah, and so that took us ages to figure out how to model correctly from, you know, teams were not chasing wins nearly as often as they should. And
interesting.
actually, you see it in hockey as well. So hockey, because of the way that the NHL has the point sets, like teams will just give up and go into an overtime for way too often versus the risk reward. Um, Soccer was like that for a very long time, and only a few very smart teams break out of that mold.
I that's very interesting. I guess you would sort of pick up on that watching, but it would be very different per manager, very different per team, very different per, you have to wait. Like a model that might work for second half win probability for like the European Championships would not work for game week 10 in the EPL, because there are very different win conditions there.
That's the other thing you don't see in American sports. You see different types of competition during the season, and you can't actually cluster those types of competition because you've got the Champions League and Europa League, which now have their own different types of formats. But
Right.
previously, there was a group stage and then a knockout stage, and like that's not really a normal set of performances because inside of that group stage, there was always, oh, this is the last round, and we want to either qualify for the knockouts or we even want to get into Europa League. So there's like weird incentives that are constantly littering the modeling space, and overcoming that's really challenging.
And it implies, you have to do a little bit of psychology there too, where you have to be like, well, what does this specific organization really want out of the next 45 minutes? And are the players aligned with the organization? Or you see this a lot, I suppose, in the old Champions League format now in game week 6, where every so often there would be two teams who were either already qualified or not qualified, just happen to play each other. What happens then? Bayern Munich is running out all of their children versus young boys who need a point to qualify, but Bayern Munich is so much better than the second place team in the Swiss league. What do you do? I mean,
So
that to me feels like an impossible thing to model.
there's like three different potential things that happen in that set. One is both teams need a particular result, especially a draw, in order to qualify, right? And
Right.
so like you'll see that draw go from maybe like 1 in 3 chance down to like a 50%. So like suddenly you're looking at a 15 to 20% change in the draw probability that the market thinks. But you don't know if the teams know that, and you don't know if the
Right.
teams are actually going to pull that off. And like other people have their own incentives inside of that, goal scoring incentives. You get money for winning more games inside of the
Yes.
Champions League as well. So like there's that element too. So you don't actually know what the real incentives are. You're trying to guess at that. The other flip side is also insane, where they both need not a draw. Like occasionally you'll have just like somebody has to score 3 here, and they
Right.
end up in like the worst situation, or they need to score goals in order to have their goal score total. So yeah, there are these really, really weird spots where because of knockouts and strange incentives in the last round, like you end up in it's you have to be very careful about betting on that sport in particular. The other thing that you get in the league is kind of happens in American sports too, is what we call DGF games, which is don't give a bleep. And I don't know if you can curse on here or not, but
Of
the
course.
DGF games are a lot of times the scoring will be higher, and you don't know
Yeah.
which team kind of gives a more. And so
Right.
you're like, how do we parse this versus the normal handicap? Because the model says that this is what the line should be. The market says this. I don't know which way to go on it. And it's something that some of the world's largest sort of sports betting hedge funds have spent a lot of time trying to figure out.
I mean, that'll happen pretty frequently in football, like week 17, week 18, one team
Mm.
will have clinched the wild card. They can't improve their seed. Well, actually, what will happen in American football is it'll be very unclear. A team can either be like the 2 seed or the 5. The Dolphins had this last year. They could
Mhm.
have been the 2 seed or the 5 seed. They started their starters, so their primary players played, but they only played like a quarter. They basically decided after like a quarter, they were like, "This isn't worth it. Like
It's a
we're not gonna."
preseason game all of a sudden. You're like,
It's a
"Oh god."
preseason game. Yeah, and that was not what the Lions were implying. If I remember correctly, the Dolphins were either favored or like very slight dogs, like implying that it was going to be full effort from both sides. And that's really only the team knows, and they might not even know. The team themselves heading
Coach is
into the
just
game,
like,
they
"Yeah, all
might
right, we're
really not
done.
know.
Too worried about this. This is tough." Now imagine being the live trader on that set of lines where you're trying to you're like, "Oh my god, what am I supposed to do with this?" I had it happen in like an FA Cup semifinal, I think, where I was trading Manchester United versus Everton, and we did not know until lineup time that basically Manchester United were playing an entire second team because they were in 3 different competitions at one time. And so they played a whole second team, half of which were kids against Everton. And that line went from Manchester United, a 3-quarter goal favorite, all the way down to like almost pick 'em. And you're like putting the line down and you're like shrinking the limits because you don't know what the line should be anymore. But it's a huge moment of panic if you're on the other side of that as a bookie, being like, we're completely in the woods now, and I don't know what we're supposed to do.
On the trading side, I actually have always wondered that. How do the trading desks kind of handle lineups? Are you modeling things based on an expected lineup? Are there often situations where you have an ability to know the lineup before it's actually posted? Whether it be like trading desk knows someone in the team or something like that, or how do you handle I don't know. Trying to think, like Erling Haaland is not playing for City. He was expected to play, but actually they're going with they're going to play Kevin De Bruyne as the false nine or Foden as the false nine. Like how are lineups treated? With that 60-minute liquidity window before the game.
So I forced all the traders at Pinnacle to get on to Twitter in like basically 2009,
Oh yeah,
2010, because that was the place that we got the fastest lineup information. And I wanted us sort of following close accounts that were smart during the daytime and in the lead up to this, so that we'd have some idea of what was happening in the lineup space. Because the moment the lineups come out, if you're missing 2 key players, like those lines can drift by huge amounts. So you do care about it a lot. Some of the hedge funds used to pay effectively what we call spotters to have inside information, like, hey, this guy didn't get on the bus, or this happened, or this happened. So they would get the information earlier and be able to use it faster. But it's always balanced against, what is the limit at the time the lineup comes out. So sometimes the bookies are protecting themselves for that sort of 5 or 10 minute period as the lineups come out to make sure that the lines don't completely explode on them.
How much of the modeling is done on a player level? It's like you see this again a lot in American football. Like, okay, Jordan Love's not going to play. The backup quarterback's going to play. That means Jordan Love is worth 6.5 points. Or just this week, Debo Samuel's not playing for the 49ers. The line moves immediately, half a point. Is there, marginal point values put on a player, put on Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne versus their Man City's not a great example because they're so good. Maybe like Arsenal would be a better example with and without Bukayo Saka. How much is he worth to the Arsenal money line?
Sure. I'm Saka and Odegaard both pretty important for the attack side of it, not necessarily the defensive side of it as much. Um, so inside of the hedge funds, like again, these are research projects that they'll pay PhDs to do that are employed by them because they wanted the best information possible, and these were places that were making anywhere between 10 and 50 million pounds a year in gambling on sports, and so like it was a real endeavor for them. So Ronaldo and Messi are the 2 biggest cases and the 2 best examples of in their prime, like what were they worth? And what they figured out was basically no player outside of those 2 was worth more than a quarter goal
Hmm.
for any particular line. Messi and Ronaldo might have been closer to like the 0.35 at the biggest sort of most outsized you know influence that they had on the lines.
Right.
But there's a secondary set that says that when you have 3 good or very good players that are missing out of a starting lineup, like now you've got kind of a replacement cascade. You don't really know what the real shape and composition of that lineup is going to be anymore. Because soccer in particular is a sport where like we don't have a lot of subs. In fact, you get 5 total. You used to have 3, and so you can't do like a with or without you type thing. You don't get to do team cohorts like you do in basketball, where like this is what they look like 5 on
Right.
5 with this group, and so you're kind of using a lot more top-down elements in your modeling than you would in being able to do very player-specific stuff inside of the NFL, but particularly basketball and to a lesser extent hockey.
If my memory serves, when I first got into soccer, I was reading all the, there was kind of like a golden age of like, oh, we actually have information for this sport now. Soccernomics was one of them. There were a couple other ones. And if my memory serves, one of the things that kind of the first, the trailblazers of researching data in soccer, what they found was it was actually much more influential when there was like a really bad player on the pitch, like a central midfielder who just could not progress the ball, or a 17-year-old center back who was way out of his depth. That it ended up instead of which team has the best player,
It's a
who
weak
has
link.
Messi. It was the weak link was actually the easier spot from a prediction standpoint.
Sometimes, yeah. Like you don't know though. That's the
Right, right.
issue.
You
Like,
really don't.
okay,
Yeah.
that 17-year-old could be Lamine Yamal,
Lamine
right?
Yamal,
And
yeah.
you're like, he's actually one of the best players in the world all of a sudden, and it didn't take him that long to get there. Sometimes, it seems like Barcelona's academy keeps trotting out like an 18-year-old or two, like that haven't
And
seen any
they
game
still
time,
don't
and you're
have
like,
any money.
still great, but yeah, it's a so yeah, it is challenging. Basically, what you're saying is like your confidence interval gets a lot larger. I don't
Right.
know how much people follow your show for talking about super nerdy modeling stuff,
Oh,
but
they love it. Yeah, they
clearly
love
we've
it.
done this
Yeah.
for a little while. Like in the transfer flow and the new premium subscription that I've done for variance betting, like the focus is partly on sort of transfer and game analysis, and then like a much more approachable type way of talking about the games, right? So like, hey, there's a model, it says this, my intuition is this, the gambling lines from recent weeks say that. So like, how are we putting all this information together to figure out, do we want to bet on this game? Which side do we want to bet on this game? And or do we want to just stay very, very clear, which is possibly the most important thing you learn as a bettor. You're like, I don't have enough information to make that bet, and I'm not a degenerate that needs to have action, so I'm going to leave it be.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing sports betting content for a long time, and it's sort of been interesting to see how sports betting content has changed as sports gambling has, basically swept across the United States of America. I think we're now down to 12 states that don't have it legal, whereas like when I started this as a job more on the fantasy side, there was nowhere. I mean, I guess it was New Jersey and Las Vegas were really the only legal places that you could make a bet. No, most sports betting content is really bad. You don't learn anything. It's just like this is my hunch. And I
Yeah.
look, don't get me wrong, I don't mind betting a hunch. And in fact, I am definitely humble enough to say, because I don't do this professionally, like a lot of what I'm doing is betting hunches with the understanding that these are not long term. Like I don't have like some crazy long term edge versus these sports books. It is betting a hunch, but the type of sports betting content I like the most is this is what the data says. This is you can understand this if you're not a very serious bettor because I'm
Mhm.
going to explain it to you. And it's a way, the best sports betting content is going to teach you something about the sport and about the game itself. Like if you analyze this Arsenal match this way, okay, Martin Odegaard's injured right now. Who's replacing him? What does that do to Arsenal's attack? What does that do to their link up play? Does that make them more or less susceptible? And you can learn something about making a wager, but you can also you could just learn about the game itself.
And some of the principles of this go from sport to sport as well. So you're like, okay, look, uh, say you're betting, you got Tennessee versus Oklahoma this weekend. You're like, all right, Oklahoma's on like, their first 2 wide receiver choices are out. The next
Mm-hmm.
ones have not seen a lot of time. They're
Their
also
their
missing.
fourth guy just got hurt too.
I know
Brennan
I'm
Thompson.
shh, don't I'm giving examples. These are like pie in the sky things. Or like, both their right guard and the right tackle are backups this week. You're like, all right, that might clearly be an indicator that like this line is not correct versus what the models had thought before. And so you're like, because like, they've got backup right side, They're probably going to have to put the tight end over there more often. These sorts of things are likely to happen if you understand the sport really well. And so like back when I was betting college football, like these were things that you clued in on. Like, oh wow, so Tulane have lost their first 3 wide receivers and their first 2 running backs. Like they just can't move the ball. They have no weapons. So like, just expect them to get run over on a regular basis, but maybe, their total is going to go down, or their team total is the thing you'll bet against. And so it's exactly that type of thing. We're saying, okay, this is the information that we know. This is what the model thinks. These days, more often than not, like the lines are actually sculpted partly by the models, because they're like, oh, this is what the baseline looked like before. So like, this is how we think things will operate. But humans are the ones that then come in and say, okay, this is all the information the model doesn't know. I'm going to layer in my own intellect and my own specific knowledge about this. And that's how you become a winner on a regular basis. And I've been around this for 20 years, and I have seen lots of people be consistent winners in areas that they're highly knowledgeable. And then I've seen people dump back a ton of money in places that they're not because they like to gamble.
And to again, full transparency, I'm much more that edge. Like I've got my gambling budget. Fantasy sports is like long term the thing that I use to speculate on, and gambling is, don't get me, gambling is a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of it. It's nice to have some skin in the game, and also if you're doing what Ted is saying, if 7 of your wagers are smart and 3 of them are, well, this game is on Monday night and I'm going to watch it anyways, and let's do a 3-leg same game parlay because I want to do it. And if I hit, I knew the same game parlay was going to send you to the moon. That's got to be the one of the most, as someone who's done this at a very high serious level, the same game parlays, just watching people, donate thousands and thousands of dollars of edge just for the sake of the sweat has got to drive you nuts.
The numbers are so far away from what they should be if you did like pure probabilities. So the margins on those things are brutal, unless you find some correlated stuff that actually is in your favor. I feel like, so when I was at StatsBomb, we actually developed a product that we never launched and we never took anywhere, but it was something that I think it pretty strongly like fits the market right now, which is effectively people want to bet on lottery tickets for sports betting, right? So like, let me put together a ticket that lets me bet like $10 to win $1 million or 10 million. And what you can do is you can have that roll over from week to week. So it's like, all right, the first one is Patrick Mahomes to get how many passing yards, a specific number, 287. That's the number of passing yards that Patrick Mahomes is predicted to get in this game. And then, will this team cover the spread? And what is the total amount of yards gained in the game itself? And what you can do is you can string these things together like a lottery ticket, and then say, okay, this is your threshold. You have at least a minimum of like 1 in 10 million probability to win this, and your ticket's green. So like you get to watch the game. You've got a lottery ticket riding on it. And then, if nobody wins out of the whole pool, it rolls over.
It rolls over.
Now, imagine how sick this is, having like a combined lottery ticket for college football Saturdays, then NFL Sundays, and then the Monday night. And so you've got these arrays of odds where you just have to pick things that we've modeled because we know the frequencies of outcomes in these different games to be able to get to that threshold. Or maybe it's an NFL Sunday and you're like, all right, so this is the Thursday night game, but the Thursday night game is gone. Like I lost my bet already on the Thursday night game. My lottery ticket's dead. So we're going to go to just the Sunday. But I've got enough games on Sunday in order to be able to add these things up. To me, this is a much better way to do sort of high ticket gambling, like single game parlays, like people want to do. They want to be able to put $5 down and win 100,000 or $1 million or 5 million or something like that. That's really what we want.
That's all we want.
There's a better way to do this, to sweat. And now imagine this on a Thursday for college basketball season. We go into March Madness and nobody wins. It rolls over to Friday. And the whole nation is playing these lottery tickets that are just rolling over. And you're waiting for somebody to hit this, right? And if you've done it right, like these, you want people to win because you want people to continue betting it. It's not an impossible bet. Like, can you pick every winner from March Madness? So this is simply who's going to hit their lottery ticket. Like everybody hits their lottery ticket on a regular basis. And if you get the odds right and you get the threshold right, this is an awesome product. And this is an entertainment product that I think America particularly would enjoy versus what we have right now, which is, you get a lot of backlash against the books for different practices that work for the books, but don't necessarily work for the bettors. And so I think that we designed a product that I felt met this thing where like people kind of like single game parlays, but really what they want is this. And so that's maybe the future of my endeavors in gambling. Somewhere in the next 5-10 years, maybe I go back to that concept. But for now, you get
It's
the
a cool
transfer flow.
concept. It's
Yeah,
a
hopefully.
it's a very cool concept. So let's talk about the transfer flow. What led you to want to come back into the content mines to write the newsletter, to be there breaking down transfers, breaking down matchups? Kind of how did that happen?
So for those of you who don't know, we had a StatsBomb podcast in the early years of
Yeah.
StatsBomb.
Listen to
So
that every week, and then every month, and then once a year after that. It's a great podcast though.
This was the the viewpoint of many passionate fans, and we started it because people were like, oh, you should have a podcast in 2013. They're like, really? People don't want to listen to us talk. Like, that's stupid. And that turned into like 10,000 people every episode who wanted to listen to us talk. And we didn't think that that was very much because, you see numbers on the internet, but apparently that was a pretty good podcast at the time. But then we were selling basically data and analytics to teams. And we got to the point that we had a lot of teams. Like by the time I left StatsBomb, we had 300 professional soccer teams from around the world that were customers of ours. And some of those customers did not like the amount of analysis and detail of potential edges that they had that we were
Right.
giving out on the podcast. And these were things that we had sort of discovered first. We weren't like leaking anybody's information, but it's a competitive marketplace. And so if they've done all this work in order to find their own edges, they don't want other people to get it for free. And they were paying us, some cases 6 figures for a year to be subscribers of the data. And you're like, maybe we will stop the podcast. Maybe we like having lots of revenue in order to be able to do that. And one of those fans was one of our earliest podcast fans that came as quite a surprise to us. But yeah, he was the general manager of the Oakland A's.
Pretty a good fan to have. If you're gonna have a fan, you'd like it to be Brad Pitt, basically, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
a good fan.
exactly.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it was the most exciting and surreal thing that we found out about our podcast. I think also we were followed by Chunk from the Goonies at one point on our, and we're like, this is
Same
cool.
tier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly the same tier. Brad Pitt slash Oakland A's general manager, Chunk from the Goonies. Influential in different ways.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I will say it is always interesting to see how, because you'd kind of been out of the content space. I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
Mhm.
I would say writing even longer than podcasting. How has that transition back been for you? Do you feel very invigorated by doing it? Are you just like really excited to crank out analysis of Jadon Sancho the next morning? Like you're in the honeymoon period right now. It's like incredible to write about the game.
So I used to write about Magic the Gathering, and I used to get paid to travel around the world to write about this silly card game. And there was the poker boom as well, and so that was back in my late 20s, early 30s. And so like I had a long time where I made money from writing, and I got used to writing fast, and I like
Yeah.
it. I've always liked it. And StatsBomb started kind of as a content marketing generation. Like I just did it because I was exploring. I liked the fact that we had data and we were able to look at this stuff. And I like the process of it, like, because what it does is it leads you to analysis that you might not have spent time on if you hadn't been through the whole writing process and asking questions and looking at the numbers. And so I missed that a lot. And when I couldn't do it, I felt the absence of it. In the period you're talking about at StatsBomb, like one of the reasons why my writing went down was because I was spending so much time in American football trying to design this product for American football. And Huddle acquired us. So those who don't know who I am, like I was the CEO and founder of StatsBomb, and then we built that over the course of 8 years to over 10 million pounds of annual revenue. Huddle recently bought it. We started in soccer, but the last 3 years of my time was mostly launching this American football product, which combined event data, so play-by-play, but really granular levels of play-by-play, combined tracking data, so 30 frames a second tracking data, so we could tell you like what people's acceleration was, up the field, like from the moment the ball left the quarterback's hand, what did the closing speed of this safety look like, stuff like that. So we combined those two things, and we had added video in it, and we added video highlighting underneath it to be able to watch each of the players that you wanted to watch, because we had the tracking data that we then put on the screen, is an awesome product. And it took a little bit longer to launch than we wanted to. And finally, after 8 years of that, everybody on the founding team decided that, okay, maybe it's time to potentially, get some money in the bank and do some other stuff. But because of that, like, I had a long time where I was wishing that I could do more content, and having to sort of stop on the soccer side because of the customers asking us not to anymore. I was like, all right, I can come back to this and it'll be fun for me. And it still is fun for me. I love the writing process. I love the fact that the fans love the writing process, which is probably the biggest thing that gets you energized, and you want to wake up and look at stuff. Um, the gambling lines are like fresh snow every single week. You're like, oh wow,
Right.
no one's touched these yet. Like, what do I think about these in a vacuum? I don't need to look at anybody else's stuff. Like, what do I think about this? What does the model think about it? The transfer stuff is the same way. Every single season, after like 10 games, you go out there into the data set and you're like, okay, who's good right now and who's terrible right now? And which things do I want to talk about this week? And so, like, that whole process in a vacuum is exciting. And then you're able to create content and talk about it to other folks. And so that's, I'm back doing it. It maybe is a honeymoon, but I did it for like decades. Like, and so it just in different sports or, silly card games.
Which is, I mean, that's such a gift, right? To be able to wake up and to be reinvigorated and so excited about it. So let's get into some specific stuff. If you guys enjoy kind of the next 20 minutes or so of this conversation, this is going to be the exact type of stuff that is in the transfer flow, which I, of course, encourage you guys to subscribe to. So let's just start real broad. What was your favorite transfer of your first window back covering? I've got a couple that I think are fairly interesting, but what was kind of your, oh, well, that team knows what they're doing, or that is the perfect fit of player and manager, or player or team?
Oh, like way back when?
Well, we could definitely do way back when, or we could do this offseason. I mean, maybe your favorite transfer of all time. That's probably an even better question.
Those ones are hard. So one of the first ones I worked on was Cesc Fabregas's deal. He was coming from Barcelona, and I knew his lawyer and his representation, and they wanted somebody to put together a dossier of if he came back to England, like, would he be good? Like, what? Give us more places to argue that he'd be excellent, because there was some disagreement about his late Barcelona period, and was he actually any good? And he was kind of put out of his normal position. But when he was in England, he was outrageously good at attacking, passing, and creating goals for other players. And so I put together this dossier to say that actually, like, he was probably one of the best attacking midfielders in the world if you put him in passing situations. And he ended up getting paid a very good amount of money. He's now the head coach over at Como in Italy, where, nice place to do your coaching and semi-retirement. But that was one of the
Right.
earliest ones I worked on. I love that. And the fun part about the early days of StatsBomb, like, as a blog, and doing transfer analysis completely from scratch, like, not actually having anybody else forged a path on this, was like, there's so much low hanging fruit. you're just like, yeah. So it was as if you went back to baseball and said, oh, on base percentage is actually really useful, like, and hitting home runs is pretty useful too. Like, what if we took the 2002 stats and just picked the best guys at this thing? Like, how could we get them? How difficult would it be to be a roster when nobody knew about Moneyball at the time? So this was like, who's good at key passes and assists? Like, who's actually good at passing? Who's good at dribbling successfully, regularly? And so things like, Antoine Griezmann was one of my earliest pieces of analysis out of Spain, and Coque, who became, a legend at
Yeah,
Atletico
great names.
Madrid. But then there was a nobody called Wissam Ben Yedder, who I think at the time was Toulouse. And I was like,
Yeah,
you know what?
that's correct.
You could get this kid for like 2.5 million. And I bet that he would be really good most places. He was built like very small, very short and stocky. And he ended up having like a decade-long career at a number of different Champions League places, scored a ton of goals, finished up his career at Monaco. So yeah, those were the type of ones where you're looking at stuff that nobody's really looked at and being like, yeah, I think that these 15 players might actually be pretty good over the course of the next decade.
That must have been very interesting, is seeing which teams started to realize the data early, like started to be like, oh, we really prioritize progressive passes per 90s, or passes per defensive action or whatever. And this kid who's playing in the Norwegian league has the best passes per defensive action we've ever seen, and his club only wants 4 million for him. So let's get this 18-year-old kid into the academy, or I guess even older players, like guys who are maybe toiling away and then realizing, oh, this guy like actually could be like a pretty good left back for us, or whatever, and then from your perspective, knowing the data and then seeing these teams do it, that had to have been a wild experience.
Yeah, and sometimes like it's really unclear as to who's smart themselves and who's sort of using an outside consultancy to like do some targeting, and sometimes they have one good transfer window and then no more, and many of them look random. And what you find out is that yeah, they lost the person that was giving them guidance there, or they stopped listening to that group and they went back to listening to agents, and there's a lot of agent-led recruitment. So it's tough from the outside to be able to tell this stuff, but certainly, Liverpool were one of the earliest ones that were definitely switched on. City switched their strategy a bunch in kind of I think the mid 2010s, and so for a while they were like buying older players that were good in Spain, and then they quickly switched to prime players or younger players that were going to be elite in the future. And you're like, huh, that's a different thing. I'm going to see if that's going to continue or not.
Well, I mean, I guess when you have all that money, it's all that money and the best coach in the world, this great academy. I did want to ask you real quick about the set pieces.
Mhm.
So if anyone who doesn't know, set pieces, corner kicks, free kicks, things like that, Ted and his cohorts were kind of some of the leaders of realizing that it was a great spot to pick up some expected goals. But I actually have a question about just how valuable the taker is themselves, because anyone who's played a ton of Football Manager will know this. A guy like James Ward-Prowse, who is probably the best I've ever seen at taking a dead ball and then putting it exactly where he wants it to go. He's like a fine central midfielder. I don't think he's like, from open play, he's like the greatest. How do you value a guy like that? Like the taker themselves, the guy who puts the ball where you want it to go.
So it depends on what your current squad looks like. And if you have no delivery people, like you really can't do the stuff that we do on set pieces.
Right.
If you've got sort of two pretty good delivery people from both sides of the ball, then it's a nice addition to be able to add that. Long throws is sort of the same way. Like, we very few teams use long throws. We view them as hand corners, and we were able to create somewhere between 5 and 10 additional goals a season up in Norway doing long throws. And uh, teams just have not figured out how valuable this is, or how to train players to do it well regularly. Some have, like there are a few, but it's not a widespread thing. And so when we looked at it, you're like, all right, what does your squad composition look like? You need to have a couple good delivery guys on both sides. If you don't, you should actually prioritize that pretty strongly, because we scored, I think, something like 20 goals in a shorter season, like a 34 game season, maybe 33. In Denmark, and it was basically 0.75 goals a game from set pieces alone. 0.75 goals a game is one of the top tier strikers in the whole world, like one of the
Right.
very best of them. Now, if you're looking at just the difference above average, so say teams are scoring 0.25 goals, so now you're like half a goal a game, which is still one of the top strikers in the whole world. And so if you have the ability to move that needle a bit and have people that do better delivery, you should get them, but not at the complete expense of everything else. And JWP is probably at the point where you're like, I'm not sure that I want him roving around in midfield anymore at the Premier League level, even for
Right.
all the value that he brings from set pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Madison would kind of be the new heir to the throne, where he actually, I mean, he's a very good on the ball player. Like, I guess I don't know too much about how his defense works, but he's the new kind of dead ball king. Luca Dean, who plays for my club, Aston Villa, is, I mean, he basically does play now that Douglas Luiz plays for Juventus. He basically
Mhm.
does play for the
He
dead
used to
ball,
do
because
long
they don't.
throws at Everton.
Yeah,
And
yeah, he
he's not
did.
tall. He's like 5'8", but he did long throws at Everton. I remember scouting him when he was really young, and then he was at PSG for a while as well. Messi's still the literal best person in the entire world from dead balls,
Right.
except for from penalties, which is an insane thing. Like
That's all. I
he
mean, that's all. It's got to be all in his head. This just got to be. It's got to be literally 100%. I mean, imagine the mental gymnastics that he's like. I'm the greatest in the world. Everything I've ever done on the pitch has gone according to plan, except this one. It has to just be. He has to be in such an emotional turmoil as he takes a
imagine
penalty.
being Steph
Honestly,
Curry and not being able to shoot more than 60% from free throws.
it is. It's absolutely insane. All right, two things I for sure wanted to hit. The first was Chelsea, and the second was the Saudi impact on particularly the top 5 leagues. So the first thing is Chelsea. Let's say, Todd Bowley, big podcast guy or big content guy. He subscribes to the transfer line. He's like, this Ted guy, I like the cut of Ted's jib. I want him to fix this mess that I've gotten myself into. I actually, on the surface of it, I didn't hate the Chelsea strategy of just like, let's buy a bunch of kids. Let's figure out a way to get around the financial rules. But then they got themselves into trouble of, okay, well, we got to get rid of our best central midfielder, Conor Gallagher, for PSR reasons. We way overspent on our other midfielders. They're not very good, but we kind of have to do this. How would Ted fix the Chelsea thing?
Okay, so first of all, we're having a 3-year guaranteed contract, and it's going to be for sort of American general manager type money. Like, I'm not
Sure.
walking into that mess for, scrappiness or future promises. This is
Right.
nonsense. Like, somebody
Not
has to come in.
yes.
The other thing we're doing is I have complete control over football operations because like I don't trust anybody else in there right now to make the right decisions. We'll figure out. I'm not firing everybody, but like we'll figure it out. But like if somebody's overruling me, then like you're firing me and you're paying out the full amount of my contract. And the reason why is because this is such a big problem and it's going to take you years in order to dig out of the hole that other people dug and rebuild the foundation so it can be run as a normal football team. I agree with you, by the way. I don't think the initial start of that strategy was bad. Like buying up assets that, are widespread and undervalued right now and could become great footballers, excellent idea. But the problem is you have too many of them and you ruin their future development because they're not able to get into teams where they can play in order to develop, you need to play. So somebody screwed up the connectivity between the initial strategy and then the actual execution of that in order to go forward. Now, I think their first team is actually pretty talented, and they might need a small adjustment in midfield, but not necessarily. Like Pochettino had that group humming at the end of last season, and somebody decided not to continue sort of supporting him and moving forward with that. If they brought in set pieces, they might have been good enough to make the Champions League toward the end of the year. They certainly would have been like favorites for fourth this year with that same sort of second half set of numbers that group had. So you look at it from that perspective, you're like, all right, there's talent here. There's all sorts of problems everywhere else in the club. Like we need to make sure that we get the right coach in that plays a good style so that, we believe in that and we're going to move forward with that. That is the first step. And then you have all this other stuff, which is like, 60% of your time that you just have to clean up everybody else's messes, get the right people in the right spots in order to make better decisions, informed decisions, and then take the time to it's going to be slightly painful. Like it just
Yeah,
is.
it's going to be some pain.
But they can't tank because that's not a strategy that works in.
Isn't that so interesting? That's such a difference, in American sports. If this was an NBA team, you do the 76ers, you'd say we will sell anyone who's not tied down. We will get our finances in order. And then we'll invest in the academy. I guess there isn't really an American equivalent of the academy, which wouldn't that be interesting if there was? That would totally change the complexity of all
Jay
of our
Williams wants to buy Duke with 49% or something like that. So maybe that's a future academy for somebody. Like you connect the dots on the private equity.
It would never happen, but official partnerships between college football teams and NFL teams would be fascinating. I think it would. And this is very neither here nor there, but could solve some of the big issues we see with how bad offensive line play is right now. If basically you're 14 years old and you meet the left guard, you're a left tackle, and you and your left guard are lifelong friends. You've literally played since you were 18 together, and then you're 25 years old and you're still playing next to the same left guard. Total pipe dream stuff.
It's a bromance. It's a bromance. Who doesn't want to? You can even film that. Like we'll watch that. That's like early off season type stuff.
Everyone would love this. The only people who don't love, the Cowboys have a partnership with the University of Texas Austin. The Chiefs are University of Missouri. I don't know, Rutgers and the Giants, whatever. However you want to figure it out.
So they're going to
Um,
be terrible forever, is what you're telling me.
well, some situations have absolutely no hope, and that's fine. Okay, the last thing I really wanted to make sure to hit on was the impact of Saudi money, not just impacting teams now, but impacting the whole market. Because basically, I guess Ronaldo is the floodgates of basically deciding, like, yeah, I'll just go play in the Saudi league. Like, what does it matter? I'll go get my money, um, and I'll go play in the Saudi league. And I will say, maybe the most disappointing transfer since I have started following uh, major professional soccer has been Ivan Toney to Al Ahly. When I wish he probably should have been an Arsenal player, but these guys basically willing to take, and I definitely do not fault the players. I should be very clear about that. Going to go get money that is going to get your ensure that no one in your family ever has to work again or struggle is like, absolutely go for it. I'm all for it. But it's just very disappointing from a sporting perspective. But it also, in the case of some of these teams, it's a total get out of jail free card if you could sell your dead weight midfielder for $60 million to the ninth best team in Saudi Arabia. I mean, that is a giant win.
So I think this is somewhat happened 3 different times now. It happened with some players coming from Europe to MLS. That used to be an old MLS strategy where they would take names, and not necessarily names that were good anymore, but they would bring names over into the United States, and then they would spread them around so that there was some name recognition, so that these teams could gradually have some reason for fans to come pay ticket prices. So that was like the first. That was quite a long time ago. They still occasionally do it, but it's slightly different now, and the quality of the league's a lot better. MLS is actually
They buy South American like teenagers now, which is great. Yeah,
they buy South American
I'm loving
teenagers,
it.
but they'll also bring in Olivier Giroud and Marco Reus.
I can't wait. So I've lived in MLS cities for my entire life. So I've seen Zlatan, I've seen Messi. Like it's so cool. Like
It
as
is.
an American fan who likes, like, I know it's not the greatest strategy for the league and its development, but it's just very cool to be like, it's a Tuesday night. Let me go watch Zlatan score 2 goals. It's a very
That
cool
that
experience.
first Latin season was outrageous. Obviously, Messi, he's still selling out insane amounts of tickets, whether he's showing up or not. So that was like phase one. Phase two was China, and because the leagues have seen the China thing happen, and China was active for maybe 3 years, and then like they tightened up the money spigot, and then like those teams pretty much all went bust. Some of those players got paid the end of their contract. Some of them did not, and
And they
so
instituted new rules too,
yeah.
midway through doing it, right?
Sure, they changed it a couple different times, and it used to be that Chinese money could then invest in sort of international soccer teams, and then they're like, no, 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 that's not acceptable anymore either, which actually meant that some of those teams went bust. So like Inter, basically went broke. AC Milan ended up having their debt secured by Elliott. Then Elliott won a title at AC Milan, first time in a long time, and then they sold to Redbird, who was one of the people on that Redbird group was Billy Bean and a friend of mine named Luke Bourne. But China was like part two. Chelsea sold a bunch of players to China. Like Oscar went there.
Oscar Ramirez.
Yeah, exactly. And so they managed to benefit from that a lot. I think also Kia Jarabchian was the agent that was like a pipeline between the two. Sven Goran Eriksson's son, I think, was a pipeline for Scandinavian players going to China as well. So there were people that were benefiting behind the scenes, not just the teams that were doing that. And then because they saw kind of the boom bust cycle there, like they learned to take advantage of it early if they could, but also to be cautious about this may disappear at any point. So we saw that there was mostly lesser spending this year, and obviously, lesser names. And also some of the players looked at it and went, some of those guys that went hated it. They really did not work out well for them. So they made sort of life choices that said that I don't want to do that. I don't want my family to have to live there for a couple of years. My time and my lifestyle is valuable as well. But you also have some guys that are like Ivan Toney. He came from nowhere. He was
Yeah.
like a he was like a bottom end of the league player, 4 leagues down or something, and then sort of ratcheted up. And then for him, like, this is life-changing money, and he was, like, very happy to take it. Brentford were just looking for a buyer for Tony. They'd been wanting to get out of, to cash in on his final season, and Osimhen was the other one that didn't go, but those 2 were in competition. But the teams don't expect that to last for the long term. So, like, when you're able to take advantage of it, awesome. But they're not sure if and when Saudis are going to pull the rug out from underneath that, how much it'll adjust. They think that because there's a World Cup slated for 2030, it might last that long. But everybody's sort of cautious, and the players are very particular about wanting to go there now, so it's not as sort of free and easy as when guys were making 5 times their salary net in China and happy to go there for a 3-year tour.
Yeah. Just a huge bummer. I mean, this is very neither here nor there again, but huge bummer Ramirez went there. He was the single greatest card that has ever existed in FIFA Ultimate Team as like an 89 pace central defensive midfielder who it was beautiful. And he actually is back in the game now. He has a hero card, which is
Oh,
beautiful.
nice.
I sadly don't have time in my life anymore to play FIFA Ultimate Team, probably for the best. But my God, that's truly a game mode that helped me fall in love with European soccer.
Like, how could you have soccer and college football Saturday, NFL Sunday, and also have FIFA Ultimate Team? Like, it's just not
You got
possible.
you got to cut something out. And sadly, video games are a very small part of my life these days. But I do literally. We are actually recording this on the day that the new edition of FIFA comes out. The pre-order edition comes out. So there are a lot of people feeling a lot of joy all around the world downloading their new game. All right, let's get out of here. Let's get a title prediction and a Champions League winner prediction from Ted.
Title prediction right now is clearly Manchester City, unless the court cases like wipes that out. The second is tough one. Like,
Very tough.
Arsenal have a bumpy midfield ride for the next couple of months, but they come out the other side of it. They could be, like, almost title contenders again. Liverpool have an excellent defense this year, and so, like, they're probably the favorites for second. Yeah. And if the court case came in, then, but it's a close one. So, like, that's a pretty even one. Champions League is always so tough to predict. One thing that people have sort of lost a little bit of sight on, and they need some injury luck going forward, but, like, Barcelona are stompy right now. They are
They're
really,
very good.
really good. Unexpectedly so, given, like, the way that squad composition has gone. But Hansi Flick seems like he's a great coach, and he's able to make all of those young players fit in very well with the older players who don't necessarily have the legs they used to, like Lewandowski, but certainly, smart and capable of doing lots of different things at a really good level.
Yeah. We are also recording this the day that the brand new Swiss state. Well, it's kind of fake Swiss based on
Big
my
Swiss.
understanding. Fake Swiss model for the Champions League does mean more games. Theoretically, some more impactful games. Theoretically, less of the dead rubber games that we were talking about at the beginning. Let's go ahead and get out of here. Ted, please tell the people where to sign up for the transfer flow and about the new variance betting newsletter that they can get.
So we are located at thetransferflow.com/subscribe. That'll get you on the newsletter. You'll join something like 5,000 people that have joined up after the first 3 months already, including hundreds of industry insiders. Cause, like, we'll make fun of things and talk about the gossip. And they also like people doing free work for them in the recruitment space. So, like, they love reading about the transfers. Like, oh, guys, maybe we shouldn't be as excited about this player because, the people at TransferFlow aren't super excited. That's not me, like, blowing our horn. That's people DMing me talking about why they subscribe. And then I recently just launched Variance Betting, which is basically it's a premium subscription on top of the TransferFlow. People asked me if I was going to start talking about betting again. I have a very long history in this. I used to be professional, and then I was the lead trader at Pinnacle for the English Premier League for almost 8 years. I'm still doing the analysis there. It's been a little while since I've done it, but yeah, if you're looking for smart gambling content that also is pretty approachable, that was the idea behind it. So we track English Premier League and English Championship, and I'm not doing any Champions League this week. But as I get a little more comfortable with the format and what it might mean, then we'll start to look at some Champions League bets as well.
All right, everyone, make sure that you're signed up. There will be a link to that in the description of this, wherever you are listening watching to it. And Boomer Sooner, buddy.
Thank you. Boomer Sooner.